One of the ways that we can indicate the type of bond a compound has is by looking at the electronegativity values of the atoms that make it up. When we subtract the electronegativity values of the two elements, we can get a number. And if that number falls within the range of 0 to 0.3, we call it nonpolar covalent. If it falls into the range of 0.3 to 1.69, we call it polar covalent. And if it's greater than 1.7, then we call it an ionic bond. So now we have learned that there are several properties that will help us classify bonds. The first type is the ionic bond, and we know that that's between a metal and a nonmetal, or a positively charged or negatively charged ion. And there's a transfer of electrons that takes place. Of course, we just learned that the electronegativity difference between that metal and the nonmetal will be greater than 1.69. And then we have the two nonmetals. And they form either a nonpolar covalent bonds because they are identical, and their electronegativity difference is 0 usually, and can range up to 0.29. And then we have the type of bond which is called a polar covalent bond between two different nonmetals, and their electronegativity difference will be between 0.3 and 1.69. Of course, both the covalent bonds are sharing the electrons. Let's do some quick examples. The first example is CH4 methane, and we're going to look at the electronegativity values for carbon and hydrogen. It's important that we only look at the two distinctive elements within the compound to calculate the electronegativity difference. We know carbon is 2.5. We know that hydrogen is 2.1. That gives us an electronegativity difference of 0.4. And if we go to the previous slide, we look at the range. 0.4 tells us that this is a polar covalent bond between carbon and hydrogen. The next example is F2. We know that a fluorine atom has an electronegativity of 4.0. Because there are two of them, that's the only element there, it's going to give you 0 as the difference. And we know 0 on that range is nonpolar covalent. We took a look at H2O. Hydrogen has a value of 2.1, oxygen is 3.5. When we subtract, we get 1.4. That falls down into the polar covalent range again. And the last one is NaF, and that is fluorine 4.0 minus sodium 0.9 to give us 3.1 as the electronegativity difference, which is going to be classified as an ionic bond. On a side note, notice that this is two different nonmetals, which we would have predicted to be polar covalent. This is two identical nonmetals, which we would have predicted to be nonpolar covalent. H2O is two different nonmetals. We would have predicted that to be polar covalent as well. And of course, we have a metal and a nonmetal, which we would have predicted to be ionic if we had just used type of atom instead of electronegativity difference. So how do bond types affect the properties of the compounds? Well, we're going to find out that there's always exceptions to the generalizations that we're going to mention in a few minutes for very small or very big molecules, but overall there's this pattern, this trend that we can identify. The first property we're going to look at is the melting point or boiling point of a compound, which is the temperature at which the change of state occurs. If we're talking about melting the solid turning into a liquid, we're talking about boiling the liquid turning into a gas. What we have determined is that ionic compounds are always found as solids under normal conditions, and because of that, they tend to have very high melting points and boiling points. They have strong attractions holding their atoms together, and it takes a lot of energy to break those electrostatic attractions and cause those atoms to separate. For metals, they're usually found as solids under normal conditions. The only exception would be mercury. And we've determined that they have intermediate melting and boiling points. Because their bond strength varies significantly, it's sometimes hard to compare melting points of boiling points of metals to ionic compounds, but we're going to put that in an intermediate position here. Lastly, we have the covalent or molecular compounds, and there are two types, remember, the polar molecules and the nonpolar molecules. We're going to find that the polar molecules are usually soft solids or liquids under normal conditions, and they have the next highest melting point, boiling point, and then our nonpolar covalent molecules have the lowest melting point, boiling points, and these are usually found as liquids or gases. Another property is solubility, the ability to dissolve, and in this case in water. And we're going to find out that both ionic and polar covalent compounds tend to be soluble in water, and nonpolar and metallic compounds tend to be insoluble in water. One of the quick ways to determine this would be to use the rule like dissolves like, which basically says that polar solutes dissolve in polar solvents and nonpolar solutes dissolve in nonpolar solvents. Remember that a polar molecule is going to have a charged end, and so it is going to attract to other molecules that have charged ends, whereas nonpolar molecules that do not have charged ends will want to be around other nonpolar molecules. If you take a look to the left, there's a little quick chemistry cat picture here that says, why did the white bear dissolve in water? Well, it was because it was polar. Get it? Right, another property is electrical conductivity. And in order for electricity to be conducted, we need to have a charge moving or flowing. And we find that metallic bonds always have free moving charge, free moving electrons, so they always conduct electricity, whether in solid or liquid state. But ionic compounds only have free floating ions when they're dissolved in water or when melted. So they can only conduct electricity in that state. They cannot conduct electricity in solid state, as you see in this picture off to the right. So there would be no electrical conductivity here, but because we've got free moving charges, and this looks like it either is dissolved or in molten state, it will conduct electricity. Lastly, we have our covalent bonds, which make up our covalent compounds. They never have free moving charges, so they cannot conduct electricity unless they are an acid or a base that is covalent in nature. Remember, these are special exceptions. There will be some charges when these molecules separate in water, so they would conduct electricity, but it's only the acids and bases that are made up of nonmetals that can do this. Most covalent compounds cannot conduct electricity. Lastly, we're going to look at the structure. For an ionic compound, it is basically made up of a lattice framework of alternating positive and negative charges, as you can see in both of these pictures down below. They pack together so that their like charge repulsions are minimized, while those opposite charge attractions are enhanced, and they will get as closely connected as possible to one another. We've already discussed the metal structure, which is a sea of electrons. You can see that in the picture to the right. And then, of course, we have the covalent compounds, and they are separated into unique, discrete molecules. So what we might see in this picture right here is a CH4 molecule. That would be one of millions within a sample. Our last picture that we see here is just kind of taking some of these properties that we've discussed in the last two presentations and pulling them together. You can see the structural model for each in the first column. You can see that alternating framework of positive and negative charge with the close packing for ionic bonds, the discrete molecule for the covalent, and that sea of electrons for the metallic bonds. Of course, the basis of attraction for the ionic bond is the electrostatic attraction between the positive and negative charge. For covalent bonds, it's the sharing of electrons. And for the metallic bonds, it's those delocalized electrons that are allowed to migrate through the cation network. There's an example for each on the end column. And lastly, we've got the energy that it takes to break that kind of bond. And you can see here that it takes a lot of energy to break the ionic bond. Let me explain something real quickly here. We did talk about how metallic bonds had intermediate strength, and if you looked at this picture, you might say that that's not being well represented here. And that's because when we break covalent compounds apart, we actually separate the molecules. We don't separate the covalent bonds. So that's why they're showing us a little bit more energy here in order to break the covalent bond than the metallic bond. So we'll talk more about this in the next slide. But when something like water separates, the molecules separate, not the actual bond between the hydrogen and the oxygen. What they're referring to here is the energy required to break the bond between the carbon and the hydrogen.